storytelling is the very first technology we ever had as cavemen and cave women that helped us not only survive the savannah, but evolve to where we are today.
What is going on, Summit Chasers? I have been very thankful recently. I'm always thankful, but I've been very thankful recently. We've had some amazing guests on the podcast, and it's always interesting. You seem to, and I think everybody can feel this, that sometimes you almost go through certain phases where you know, a certain topic comes up very often, or you get really fascinated with a certain, you know, business, an avenue, and whatever you're interested in, or whatever your industry is. So for me in business, it's been strategy and storytelling. Recently, I've been doing a lot of research on game theory, and a lot of our guests that come on, they're experts in storytelling, particularly in business. How do you tell your story? How do you imprint your story into your brand, into your market? How you communicate to your clients? How you sell? And there's been so many intricacies and things that are very relatable and in common when it comes to business strategy in general and storytelling. Like, your business strategy is just, you're almost creating a story of how you're going to accomplish your goal. And that's one problem that a lot of business owners or C-suites have, is that they don't necessarily create a strategy. They create a goal, and then they motivate their team to hit the goal. And then that's the strategy. That's not the strategy. That's the what and the why. But you need to fill that space in the middle of how you're going to get there. And that where lies the bulk of the story. A lot of stories start with an extenuating circumstance, and a villain and a hero gets identified, that they need to overcome the challenge and accomplish the goal, which is defeating the villain, saving the world, whatever it is, right? Falling in love, whatever kind of movies you're into. But you're trying to paint a story based on forecasting what could happen by looking back at what has happened, investigating, you know, your current strengths, your current weaknesses, what are some opportunities, what are some threats, and identifying those, and how do you leverage your strength. And in doing so, you're creating a story. It's a hypothesis, but the only difference is that story could change as you go. When you write a story, the story is written. When you're creating a strategy, you're creating what you'd like it to look like, but then a lot of times it's going to change, because an initial strategy is really just an experiment. But in creating that strategy, you're telling a story. And it's been so interesting going on this journey and learning so much about it, and putting those two together. It's been fascinating. It's been a thrill for me. I hope it's been a thrill for you. But I wanted to identify something that, what is your hero story? Everybody has one, right? And one of the best ways to connect and really create relationships and community with your target audience is to tell your story, and is to have a story. And this is one thing I've learned fairly recently, actually, is your story is how you become who you are today. It's how you can relate to the problem that you're trying to solve to your customers and to your clients, your market. And the great thing about stories is everybody has one. And even if you're watching this and you're saying, what do? I don't have a story. And I promise you do. It doesn't have to be this grandiose adventure full of rock bottoms, dragon slaying triumphs, and this outlandish success. It just has to be relatable and authentic. But don't take it from me. Take it from one of our most recent guests on our Summit Chasers podcast. It's business storytelling master, Park House. I'm going to let him take it from here. There's nothing that will make you more relatable than telling your story, right? Especially to those that can relate. And maybe they can't relate to the entirety of the story, but there's going to be some aspects that they can relate to it. It also makes you human. So if you're a CEO of a large company, or you're a business owner of a small and medium-sized company, your story makes you real to them, it can bring you down to communicate on their level in a way. And I really love the story cycle system that you have. And I relate to a lot of it, but there's 9 steps, right? There's the backstory, the hero, the stakes, then disruption, then you have the villain, and then the mentor, the journey, and then your victory. And then at the end, you kind of have the morals, right? Or is it the ritual at the end?
Morals. That's very good, Zach. You're pulling that out. That's great. Most people can't pull that off. Yeah, it's 10 steps. And the final step is ritual. And that is meant to be, how do you build repeat business and scale the story that your audiences, your customers have bought into? So well done on that.
Oh, I appreciate it. Well, as I was going through it, I think one of the reasons I could remember it is because as I tell my story and I tell it more often, it almost kind of naturally, and I didn't do it on purpose, but it kind of almost naturally follows that cadence. Maybe I just don't highlight the right parts of it, but it follows that kind of cadence. And I really identified with it. And again, I kind of naturally followed it, but for those where that cadence, those steps, it's not as obvious. Their story isn't as obvious to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot of people who say like, there's nothing special about me, right? Well, like I don't have a story to tell, but they do, right? So if you have somebody, again, whether they're a business owner, CEO, or C-suite, or whatever it is, leader, where could they start to generate their story, build their story when it's not as obvious to them?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, a point I want to make first, when you said you were already kind of doing this, I believe it, because the hero's journey, of which the 10-step story cycle system is based off of, is this template to story that's been around since the very first recorded story of Gilgamesh. And it's something that we can all relate to because it basically, we experience the hero's journey every day in our lives, from large epic journeys to small little journeys and everything in between. So our brain, and Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist, will argue, as with Joseph Campbell, the creator of the hero's journey, that we automatically recognize this pattern to story because we live it and breathe it every single day. So that's when I saw that and said, aha, that's why, how we should be using this, or why we should be using it in brand narrative. And then where to start on that. And when people say they don't have a story, you're exactly right, Zach. Everybody has a story. And believe it or not, your story's interesting. Other fellow Homo sapiens want to hear your story. And the reason being is, I believe that storytelling is the very first technology we ever had as cavemen and cave women that helped us not only survive the savannah, but evolve to where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to take on that noise of technology that's out there now, via the interwebs and so forth, use the technology of story. It's like the software that speaks and drives the hardware of our limbic problem-solving, decision-making, buying brain. So if you're looking for your story, what I tell people is, don't look for your stories, go find your scenes. And what I mean by that, find 3 moments in time that your world changed, that a curiosity took you down a path, a passion took you somewhere else. It was a rabbit hole. You had no idea where you were going with it, but it was kind of the way of the universe to guide you down this, to have an aha moment, to find something like, I want to do that. For instance, when I was a very, very, very little kid, I was out at Lake Lida in Minnesota visiting my grandpa and grandma. My grandma Mabel was this old, old grandma, and she was wonderful, marvelous lady. And she sat down at the piano one day when I was a little dude. I mean, I must have been not even in kindergarten, maybe kindergarten. And she started playing a ragtime tune on that piano, and it blew my mind. I just sat there thinking this was a piece of furniture. It turns out to be an instrument. And my old lady grandma could knock that out. And she was bouncing back and forth. And Zach, I looked at her and I sat there godsmacked. And I said, I want to be able to do that. So I bugged my parents for several years. And by the 3rd grade, they finally got me a piano. And that's what launched my piano playing, writing, composition career. So that's one little story I tell. Then let's fast forward. I'm getting a degree in advertising. I've got some extra time on my hands. I keep walking by the music school, and I'm like, well, I've got some extra time. I could go ahead and just start taking some classes. Well, excuse me, I did. And I graduated with a degree in music before I did with advertising. Another, how that old world have come, together. Then I jumped, several decades ahead. And here I am now teaching story composition and theory to help brands grow, to help sales and marketing teams. So those are 3 little moments that I can share with people. And when I knit them together, it becomes an overarching story. And hopefully I didn't take any longer than 2 minutes to tell you that. You can tell them very quickly, but it's so important to go and find these moments that have shaped and informed who you are today, knit them together as scenes, and that will tell your story, essentially your origin story of why you do what you do. And most people are going to find that fascinating because they can relate to it. They've got a similar story. It may not be, about music, and it may not be about advertising, but they've got similar scenes in their own life that have come together to, inform their character, that overall character arc of what they're doing today.
And I think that exercise in itself, trying to find, like you said, those, even if it's just 3 aha moments or 3 moments that, whether they enlightened you or opened up doors for you, that's a very good exercise in like self-introspection, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, I did this before. So it's almost that exercise will give you credit to be able to, allow yourself to create success in the future as well. But also
I
another
can
thing I
even help
took.
your audience
Go
with
ahead.
that. In fact, I did a TED talk on this, a TEDx talk, TEDx Gilbert, and it was 2018. They can search it online, and it's all about find your scenes and your story will find you. And I walk them through that exercise. I show it in examples of famous iconic characters like Steve Jobs, as an example. Who talk about these moments that have shaped who they are today. And then I show people how to actually do it. So that's an additional resource people could use if they want to really put that to practice.
And we will link that below for sure.
Perfect.
I'll go find that. I'll link that below. I might even use it at the beginning for a little highlight reel. But I think another lesson that I kind of take away is, I think when they hear like tell your hero's story, tell your hero's journey, they think like Marvel, like, okay, I like Thor, like Thor, or maybe they hear, a story of, maybe my story is an example of that, where, you had to be at rock bottom, then you had to come through this kind of stuff, or they hear, the Patrick Bet-Davids who came from Iran and then started a $500 million insurance business. So they think like, I don't have any stories like that. I don't have, like, how am I supposed to inspire? But you don't have to. That's not the point of it. The point is to relate. The point is to tell how you got to where you are, and giving strength and foundation to what you're giving out right now, or what you're communicating right now. Am I on the right track?
Yeah. And so the first thing I would tell people too is don't worry about the hero's journey. That's a big, long story template, and it can get confusing. It's really fun to watch and to learn about, but you don't have to become a story theorist to be good at telling your story. So, number one, push that to the side. Number two, think about moments. Stories are always about moments in time. Number three, Kurt Vonnegut, very, very famous American author, said, a story is nothing more than a man gets in a hole, a man gets out of a hole. It doesn't have to be about a man. It doesn't have to be about a hole. The world loves that story. So, Zach, I would imagine when you're telling your story, going rags to riches and that sort of thing, people are most interested in the rags part of that story. They don't, it's great. Applaud you. You have all this great success. The guy from Iran you're talking about has that great success. Fine. But people want to know, what did you have to go through? And what did you learn in that conflict, during that problem, in that hole that you pulled yourself out of, that I can learn? That in case, if it ever happens to me, I know what to do. And when they're telling that story of man, woman gets in a hole, man, woman gets out of a hole, that they're playing again to that problem solving, decision making limbic brain. And you're hacking all the noise out there, and you're hooking into that emotional heart, because that limbic brain is all about survival. It has one job and one job only, the survival of this being. It's all happening in the background in our subconscious. We don't even realize the choices it is making on our behalf until it levels it up to our conscious mind. And so you want to speak to that subconscious mind in your storytelling, and it is mostly interested in your trials and tribulations, what you've been through, what you learn in that process, and how you emerged victorious. And then after that, what did you have to go through again? So look for moments. Tell us about a time when things all went south, and how did you get out of it? Those are the stories people really care about.
So then the outcome, so with Patrick Bet-David as the example, they don't necessarily care that he's worth $1 billion now. They just say, okay, that's proof that I can get through this and create something great with my life. It's not necessarily, that's not what they're focused on. They're focused on, how did I get out of it? How did I come through this? The decisions that I had to make, the triumphs and the tribulations, that I had to go through. That the outcome is just proof that it can be done.
Yeah. That can't relate to that outcome. I mean, it's too big. It's too fanciful. My wife and I've been watching this TV show Succession. What a bunch of bunch of miserable individuals. It's hard to pull for any of them because they're all sycophants, greedy sons of bitches when it comes right down to it. And their last night, one of their episodes, they're on this big, fabulous, multi-billion-dollar yacht, out in the Mediterranean somewhere. Well, you can't relate to that. But you can relate to all the BS that they go through and they cause, all the problems they cause themselves and those people around them because of their greed, because of, they're kissing up to everybody, above them. And so that's what makes that story interesting. Just to go and see all the wealth they've got doesn't matter. It's all the misery they cause and they cause themselves and how they get through it that is actually of interest to us.